Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on our second forum where we're talking about the pathways to 100. I'm Jessica Vega-Peterson. I'm a Multnomah County Commissioner. I've worked on climate issues and energy issues for a few years now and was really happy to be one of the co-sponsors to the resolution that Multnomah County passed. The important part and where the important work is going to be done is right now, talking about how we're actually going to achieve those goals and make sure that what we pass, the ideals that we have, actually become the reality for our region. Today we're talking about environmental justice and making sure that we have an equitable and just transition. First of all, I wanted to take a minute to thank the sponsors of today's event, Pacific Power, PGE, and Northwest Naturals. So joining us today on our panel are four really interesting and exciting people who are going to be talking about different aspects of making an equitable transition to a clean energy future. Alan Hippolito from Verde, Oriana Manera from the Northwest Energy Coalition, James Valdez from Spark Northwest, and Dr. Hal Nelson from Portland State University. And I'm going to turn it over to Alan to go ahead and kick us off.
My name is Alan. So I work for an organization named Verde. Verde serves communities by building environmental wealth through social enterprise, outreach, and advocacy. So last week, a number of us were at the Citizens Utility Board at the Cub, and we were talking about the connection between energy and building community, and we were recounting the history of electrification as a progressive activity, as a progressive priority. Things like Tennessee Valley Authority, the electrification of rural Texas, in large part led by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And if you read some of that history, do you recognize how difficult it was to live in Central Texas in the early and mid 20th century without electricity? Pretty detailed accounting of what it means to draw water, wash, cook, can, clean without electricity. And LBJ, having grown up in that community, along with others, made it a personal mission to deliver electrification to rural Texas. And this was explicitly anti-poverty work. And today, for us, we're in a similar place with this transition, except we don't want to do this for low-income people and people of color. We want to do it with them. The most exciting and difficult part of this beginning is the commitment to community-based renewable energy infrastructure, starting with a 2% standard in 2035. Let's be clear, our existing tools to do this are inadequate. Our financing is inadequate, and the challenge and opportunity in front of us is great. Community-based innovation will have to be supported and affected, and our systems are going to have to change. How do we do that? How do we strengthen the connection between a renewable energy economy and building community? So I would submit that the opportunity in front of us is to figure out which aspects of this transition really offer the greatest engagement for our low-income people and people of color and the greatest benefit.
My name is Oriana Manera. I'm an outreach and policy advocate with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and my work is focused largely on issues for low-income and marginalized communities, although I'm not a direct service provider. As you can see just from looking at these numbers, it takes a few $1,000s at the high end and a few $100s on the low end, even at an entry point like getting an Energy Star washer. And that means that you have to have a lot of cash on hand in order to participate. The only truly accessible entry points are do-it-yourself weatherization kits or light bulbs, and that's a long way from full accessible participation in a transition to cleaner energy. So some of the barriers to participation that come up are, first, you have to own a property. The split incentive means that people who rent don't have access to energy efficiency or renewables upgrades. Then you need to have the upfront cash. So as we looked in the first slide, it costs quite a bit even to go at the entry point, and you can have things like on-bill financing, but that's not always an option. Then you need to have tax liability. Tax credits aren't workable for low-income communities unless they're refundable. And finally, you need to have some sort of stability. The threat of displacement means that folks may be less likely to invest in measures because they're likely to be displaced from their homes. So that brings us to the challenges that our programs face. Programs are underfunded, and they're about managing crises and filling gaps, sometimes literally. They also don't take into account different low-income experiences, and they don't address specific issues for communities of color. Bill assistance programs and bill payment plans are crucial, but they're transitional, not sustainable fixes, and they don't help with the economy-wide transition. Most funding supports only one pillar of the transition to 100% renewables by 2050, and that's energy efficiency, or they also support bill assistance. There's a big gap for distributed generation that the community solar could fill, but we don't quite know what that will look like from the low-income perspective beyond the carve-out. Funding also either comes from the federal government or from ratepayers. So from the perspective of protecting ratepayers in the state, as Alan mentioned, we have to think about ways to not use ratepayer funds for programming that will impact low-income or low-moderate income communities. So finally, we need solutions. We need solutions that, as Alan said, are made with the community and not for the community, that are community-driven and address specific community needs and the variety of low-income experiences. We need programs that are sustainable, creative, and create stability. We also need new sources of funding. We can't just move money around for low-income communities and assume that that will take care of the problem. We need to find new creative ways to make that happen. And as Alan also said, we need to think outside the energy box. We need investment that supports a greater supply of affordable housing. We need investments that support public health issues like the asthma and other health effects that come from living in substandard dwellings. And if we're really going to reach 100% renewables by 2050, we need energy efficient homes that are also green, healthy, and resilient. So we need to think well outside the box if we're actually going to achieve an economy-wide transition. Thank you.
The big bang for your buck, especially in the short term, is on demand-side management, energy efficiency. Those policies are cheaper than the other policies that are out there. And so here you can see the second blue bar. Those are the energy efficiency demand-side management policies. Those have the greatest job growth potential. Those are associated with the greatest gains in employment at the lowest initial capital cost per job. So we see that there's going to be more money that's needed, but your energy efficiency is going to be the cheapest way to grow the economy and to create jobs. Low-income households live in much worse dwellings, right? So the average renter pays about 30% more in energy than an owner-occupied dwelling. That's because they have worse insulation, older equipment. We need to convert our bill assistance into weatherization. And we actually have some data here on the kind of non-monetary or non-energy benefits of weatherization. And they show about $14,000 in non-energy benefits per unit weatherized. And this is from things like lower thermal stress, fewer colds, flus, those kinds of things.
My name is James Valdez. I work for an organization called Spark Northwest. We're a regional organization with a mission of helping create communities powered by locally controlled, clean, affordable energy. Really fundamentally, we want to see meaningful changes in the systems and the infrastructure that powers our lives, as well as who benefits from those investments and from that deployment. Some of these changes are things that we do have some say or control over, and some changes that are coming down in the next decades are things that we don't have as much direct control over. One of the things I want to make sure that we address is really the climate change impacts that will be really impacting and affecting a lot of the work that we do here in the city and the county. In general, we see a continual warming trend projected, particularly in summer. There'll be more extreme heat days in future years. And that also, even though precipitation as a whole is likely to remain the same, that there'll be more rain falling instead of snow, which has impacts for our entire regional energy system, including the hydro system, because there'll be less snowpack and more potential flooding events and springtime flow. In general, just a lot more variability. And so as we look to what we want to do with 100% renewables, I think we need to look at the opportunity to mitigate hazards and to really build community resiliency, not just for earthquakes, which we think about, but also from wildfires, floods, heat waves, and also displacement. We're likely to see a lot of people moving to the Northwest from other parts of the country and world potentially, where the climate impacts are even greater. As we look for equity outcomes, which is really what we want both equity outcomes and processes as we move forward in this. I think it's important to really recognize that energy should be seen as a fundamental human right. And there's about 12 other cities, or over a dozen other cities in the U.S. that have made commitments to 100% renewable. Some of those cities are looking at making investments that really redirect where their contracting comes from further power through tools like community choice aggregation. Some are looking at building code improvements and things that they can do to mandate certain construction to happen that is where energy generation is part of the standard for new building construction. But fundamentally, a lot of choices happen at the individual and household level. And I think that's where we're most interested and engaged in making opportunities available for new wealth creation and new pathways to choice, especially for low-income communities and communities of color that have been historically shut out from a lot of previous choices of investment. By that, I mean also in terms of real estate and housing and all the structural, historical barriers that have been put up. And so we see a new range of tools and opportunities to stabilize energy costs and to do so in a way that really involves people and communities at the center of that decision making. And so in addition to community solar and electric vehicles and these things that we kind of hear about as coming on the horizon. There's just a lot of other tools that we're starting to see that are going to be in the market or are in the market already, including things like ductless heat pumps and demand response opportunities for water heaters and Nest thermostats and automation and home control, and really potentially even replacing entire dwellings, like mobile home replacement for modular homes that are significantly more efficient but also healthier. And when we look at technologies coming down the road, we also have things like car sharing and autonomous vehicles that could play a role for people throughout the entire income spectrum, but only if the tools and education and resources are there to make that possible. I guess the vision that we want to put forward is one that as we look at these opportunities, which all have the potential to significantly lower costs and provide cost stability and a better quality of life, that we create pathways for low-income people and communities of color to reach those. And there are some good examples to follow in other states and other countries. I know this is a long process, and we do have time, but I feel like we need to start soon. And we also do need to address kind of some of these gaps in funding, because as Oriana mentioned, there's even the current programs that we have don't have enough resources in them. We don't really have all the answers, but we're in this journey together, and I think it's that commitment to work together that's really what's needed. I think that hopefully we have that, and I'm optimistic.
So thank you, Oriana, Hal, James, and Alan, for really a broad look at all of the different ways that, all of the different issues that surround this topic when we talk about how low-income folks are going to be impacted by clean energy transition, both environmentally, economically, where the opportunities are, but also in the ways that it expands that, even touching on housing and public health, that came up. Everybody, please join me once again in thanking our four panelists today.